The year is 1470. In the mountains of Thessaly, a bell tolls one final time, its echo fading across a valley that will never hear it again. Within the stone walls of the convent of St. Catherine, 23 women kneel in prayer. Their lips move in unison, forming the familiar words they have spoken every dawn for years. But this morning, the words taste different, like ash, like a farewell. Beyond their sanctuary, the horizon bleeds a deep, ominous red, not from the sunrise, but from the banners of an empire that has consumed kingdoms whole. The Ottoman army does not simply march. It flows, a relentless river of steel and fire, scouring the earth clean of all that stands in its path. Sister Eleni, the abbess, clutches a silver crucifix that has endured for 3 generations. Her hands tremble, but not from fear. She knows what is coming. They all do. What they cannot fathom, what no one could have imagined, is that death would have been a mercy. For what happened next was not recorded in the history books you studied. It was buried, erased, hidden beneath centuries of silence. What the Ottomans did to these women was more than conquest. It was something far more calculated, a strategy historians are only now beginning to unearth. The question is not whether you can handle the truth. It is whether you are willing to remember it. If you have ever wondered why some stories vanish while others are told and retold, you are in the right place. Here, on Crimson Historians, we excavate the archives the world tried to forget. Missionary letters, Ottoman state records, testimonies buried deep within Vatican vaults. Every view, every like, every subscription helps us pull one more voice from the darkness. Now, let us return to that convent, for the bell has fallen silent, and the doors are about to splinter. To comprehend the fate of these nuns, you must first understand the machine that consumed them. 17 years earlier, in 1453, Constantinople fell. The jewel of Christendom, a city that had stood for a millennium, was extinguished in 53 days of cannon fire and bloodshed. The Hagia Sophia, the world's greatest cathedral, was stripped of its crosses within hours. Its golden mosaics were plastered over, its bells melted down. Within a week, the Islamic call to prayer echoed from its domes, where Christian hymns had resounded for 9 centuries. Sultan Mehmed II stood in the nave of that desecrated church and declared it a mosque. He did this not for lack of a place to worship, but because he understood a truth most conquerors do not. You do not defeat a people by killing them. You defeat them by erasing who they were. The Ottomans conquered more than land. They conquered identity. When Mehmed looked west toward the scattered remnants of the Byzantine world, he saw wounds that refused to heal. Every church bell that still rang, every monastery that still stood, every cross casting a shadow on conquered soil. These were acts of defiance, proof that the old world clung to life. And every nun who prayed in Latin was a living testament that faith could outlast any army. And so the Sultan made a decision. If they would not convert, they would disappear. Not through massacre, for massacre creates martyrs. Martyrs inspire resistance. Songs are written, stories are told, and the dead become immortal. The Ottomans had perfected something far more insidious, a method that left no songs, no stories, no memory at all. Erasure. By 1470, this strategy had been tested across the empire. Greek monasteries in Moria, Serbian convents in the Balkans, Armenian churches in Anatolia. They did not burn them all. Some were converted, others abandoned. But the pattern was constant. First came the offer, then came the silence. The convent of St. Catherine, perched on a remote Thessalian hillside, far from any garrison or ally, was destined to become another test case, another footnote in imperial expansion. But these women did not know they were footnotes. They were not warriors. They were women who had devoted their lives to silence and prayer. Their weapons were rosaries. Their armor was faith. Most had never seen a soldier, never held a blade, never imagined they would need to. Sister Eleni had been abbess for 12 years. Before that, she tended the sick in a village erased by plague in 1448. She came to the convent not to escape the world, but to make sense of its sorrows. Sister Magdalena was just 19, her vows only 2 years old. Her hands still bore the calluses from her father's farm. She had sought refuge here after her family was killed in a raid. Sister Theodora was 70. She had outlived 2 abbesses, an emperor, and more wars than she could count. She had stopped fearing death decades ago. None of them were prepared for this. If this moment in history does not move you to learn more, you may be missing the lesson our ancestors died to teach, that the most dangerous act in the face of power is to refuse to forget who you are. Now, Let us witness what happens when faith meets empire. The first cannonball strikes just after dawn. It does not hit the chapel but the bell tower. The sound is apocalyptic. Stone erupts into the air. Iron shrieks against iron. The bell, which had rung every morning for 140 years, shatters mid-swing, its fragments raining down upon the courtyard herb garden. The same hands that tenderly cared for those plants now cover ears, trembling. Sister Eleni does not scream. She rises, crucifix held high, and begins to sing. The Kyrie eleison. Lord, have mercy. One by one, the others join her. 23 voices rise against the roar of an empire. But empires do not listen to songs. By midday, the gates are breached. Ottoman soldiers pour into the courtyard. Not with swords drawn, but with ledgers, quills, and inkpots. They move through the convent like clerks, not conquerors. Counting, recording, cataloging. To the Ottomans, these women were not people. They were assets. A translator steps forward, a Greek man from these very hills. His voice quavers as he reads from a scroll, shame lacing every word. By order of Sultan Mehmed II, all subjects of the conquered territories must submit to the authority of the Sublime Porte. Those who convert will be granted protection. Those who refuse will face the consequences of rebellion. Sister Eleni steps forward, her face serene. She speaks not to the soldiers but to the translator in a Greek so clear everyone understands. Tell your Sultan we have already given our lives to a king. We have nothing left to surrender. The officer in charge, a man named Hassan Pasha, whose name is recorded in Ottoman military logs from the 1470 Thessalian campaign, does not respond with anger. He offers something far more chilling, a smile, for he knew a truth the nuns had yet to grasp. The Ottomans had mastered the art of breaking people without killing them. That night, the women are locked inside their own chapel. No food, no water, only darkness and the sound of soldiers outside, laughing, eating, living, while they wait to see who breaks first. Two younger sisters from Corinth weep in a corner, their sobs echoing off the cold stone. But Sister Magdalena, barely 20, begins to whisper a psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Then another. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. One by one, others join her, and slowly, the weeping ceases. This was the moment the Ottomans underestimated them. These women had spent a lifetime preparing for suffering. Fasting, night vigils in the cold, hours of silent submission to a power greater than themselves. What the soldiers saw as torture, the nuns saw as discipline. But Hassan Pasha was patient. He had witnessed this before in Moria, in Vlachia, in Serbian monasteries where monks believed faith alone would save them. Faith is like a candle, he once wrote in a letter preserved in the Topkapi Palace archives. It burns brightest just before it dies. He was ready to test his theory. On the second day, the doors open. A servant enters with bread and water, real food, clean water. He sets it down without a word and leaves. The nuns stare at it, their throats parched, their stomachs hollow. The younger sisters look to Eleni, desperation in their eyes. Sister Theodora, the eldest, speaks first. They want us to take it, to feel gratitude, to soften. Eleni nods. Then we fast. They do not touch the food. By the third day, their lips are cracked and bleeding. Their hands shake. The youngest can barely stand, but they do not break. Hassan Pasha watches from the courtyard, arms crossed. He is impressed, frustrated, and for a fleeting moment, something akin to respect flickers across his face. But respect does not alter strategy. On the third day, the doors open again. This time, it is Hassan himself. He speaks in Turkish, the translator shadowing him. You are not criminals. You are not enemies. You are simply mistaken. The Sultan is merciful. He offers you new lives, new names, his protection. All you must do is speak the words. Silence. Or, you can come with us to Constantinople. There, the Sultan himself will hear your case. Perhaps he will be moved by your conviction. He pauses, letting the promise hang in the air. But the road is long, and the weak do not survive it. It was not a threat, but a promise. Sister Eleni looks at her sisters. Some are barely conscious. Some pray with eyes closed. Some stare at the stone floor seeking strength. She turns back to Hassan. We will walk. The smile returns to his face. Good. We leave at dawn. That night, the nuns hold one another in the darkness. No one speaks. But Sister Magdalena begins to hum a hymn from Vespers. One by one, the others join her. Outside, the soldiers hear it. Some pause. Some look away. One of them, years later, would tell his grandson of the women who sang themselves to death. A story that would, itself, be forgotten. For now, the hymn rises through the cracks in the chapel walls and drifts into the night. Prayer. A plea. A declaration. We are still here. They leave at dawn on the fourth day. 23 women, their hands bound with rope, walking south toward the coast. No carts, no horses. Only their feet, the dust, and a sun that showed no mercy. The soldiers do not rush them. They do not need to. The road itself is the punishment. On the second day, Sister Irene collapses. At 62, her knees had been failing for years. She tries to stand, but her legs betray her. The soldiers do not wait. Sister Magdalena and another nun, Sister Anna, lift her between them and carry her for 3 miles. When they stop for the night, Irene is unconscious. By morning, she is gone. They bury her by the roadside with their bare hands. No tools, no ceremony, only dirt and whispered prayers. The soldiers watch but do not interfere. Hassan Pasha makes a note in his ledger. 22 remaining. On the fourth day, it happens again. Sister Callista, who hasn't spoken since the siege began, simply stops walking. She sits in the middle of the road, closes her eyes, and does not get up. They leave her there. By the time they reach the port of Volos 7 days later, only 18 remain. But something had shifted on that road, something the Ottomans had not anticipated. The nuns ceased their weeping, their begging. They walked in a profound silence. But it was not the silence of defeat. It was the silence of women who had already made their choice. Sister Eleni had walked at the front of the line, leading them even with bound hands. But on the 7th morning, Hassan Pasha summons her. She is brought to his tent alone. What transpires next is absent from Ottoman records. It is found in a letter from a Venetian merchant who witnessed the aftermath, a document discovered in 2003 in the archives of Dubrovnik. He writes, "I saw them bring her back at dawn. She could not walk. Her eyes, God forgive me, her eyes were open, but she was not inside them anymore. They dressed her in silk and paraded her through the camp as a convert. But when I passed close, I heard her lips moving. She was still praying in Latin, silently. She had not broken. They had simply taken her body and left her soul to wander." This was the Ottoman strategy history overlooks. They did not want martyrs. Martyrs inspire resistance. They wanted ghosts, women who would walk, talk, and breathe, but would never be whole again. Living proof that rebellion was futile, living warnings to any who believed faith could withstand empire. Sister Eleni walked with them the rest of the way to the coast, but she never spoke again, never met anyone's gaze. She was present, yet utterly gone. The younger sisters wept when they saw her. The older ones simply prayed harder. At the port of Volos, they are loaded onto a galley, a massive warship with rows of benches and chains bolted to the wood. This was no passenger ship, but a vessel of control for slaves, prisoners, and cargo. The nuns are chained to the benches, their wrists locked in iron rings. A ship's manifest, discovered in 1987 in Istanbul's Topkapi Palace Museum, lists them not by name, but by number. Religious captives, female, 18. Destination, imperial household. Purpose, domestic service and conversion. That word service hides a multitude of sins. The voyage lasts 12 days. The sea is merciless. Storms lash the deck, salt spray stings their cracked lips, and the ship pitches violently. The women, who have never seen the ocean, vomit until nothing remains. At night, the youngest, Sister Magdalena, whispers psalms under her breath. Her voice is faint, barely audible over the crashing waves. But the other prisoners, Greeks, Serbs, Italians chained beside them, turn their heads to listen. For a moment, the sea itself seems to still. When the ship finally enters the Bosphorus, the sisters see the skyline of Constantinople rise before them. Domes, minarets, walls stretching into eternity. The city gleams in the dawn light like a freshly sharpened blade. For centuries, it had been called the city of the world's desire. Now, it would become their cage. From the docks, they are marched through narrow streets lined with merchants, soldiers, and slaves. People stopped to stare. Christian nuns among captives were a rarity, even in this empire of conquest. They are led past ancient walls, Through imperial districts, past gardens where fountains danced and peacocks screamed. Then, in the shadow of the Hagia Sophia, the great church turned mosque, they are forced to kneel. As the call to prayer echoes from the minarets, one of the sisters whispers, "We are home, but it is no longer ours." They are taken to the palace, but not to the grand halls or sunlit courtyards where viziers conspire. They are taken below, down stone steps that spiral into darkness, through tunnels reeking of damp and decay, to a place that does not officially exist. If you are still watching, it is because a part of you knows the story must be told. Subscribe to Crimson Historians. Not for us, but for them. For the voices swallowed by silence. Now, let us follow them into the dark. Beneath Topkapi Palace lies a network of tunnels tourists never see. Storage rooms, servant quarters, forgotten corridors winding through the bedrock. And in the farthest corner, sealed for centuries, a room with no official purpose. In 2011, during restoration work, archaeologists broke through a false wall. What they found halted them cold. Scratched into the stone, barely visible, were crosses. Dozens of them, small, crude, carved with fingernails or shards of broken pottery. And beneath those crosses, etched in Latin, for words, lux in tenebris lucet, the light shines in the darkness. This was their chapel. For months, perhaps years, these women lived beneath the palace, working as silent servants by day, scrubbing floors, washing linens, tending fires in rooms they would never enter. But at night, when the palace slept, they gathered in this forgotten room and prayed. They had no priest, no altar, no Bible, only memory. They recited half-forgotten psalms, reshaped verses into new prayers, held communion with stolen bread and water, and they carved their faith into the stone, one scratch at a time, knowing no one might ever see it. Sister Magdalena was among them, the girl who had whispered psalms on the ship, carried Sister Irene on the road, and refused to look away when Eleni returned, broken. She became their voice in the dark. The archaeologists found her mark, too. A small bird scratched into a corner. Beside it, 23 lines were drawn, one for each sister, but only 11 were complete. The rest trailed off into nothing. They used broken pottery for candle holders, a scrap of linen for an altar cloth. From a shard of a shattered mirror, they fashioned a crude cross. In this secret chapel, they gathered each night after the palace slept. No hymns, no sermons, only whispers. Each woman would kneel and share a memory. Her home, her church bell, the warmth of bread before dawn. These memories became their new psalms, offerings to a God who still listened in the dark. A Venetian prisoner, held for ransom in the palace in 1478, wrote of strange voices echoing beneath the harem, women singing in Latin to a god not of this empire. For centuries, historians dismissed it as superstition, until they found the chapel. But here is what shatters your heart. The crosses stop. Halfway across the wall, the scratches become erratic, desperate. The lines deepen, as if carved with furious urgency. Then, nothing. Ottoman records from 1482 mention a cleansing of the palace staff under the new sultan. Anyone deemed unproductive or resistant was removed. No details, no names, no burial sites, just one line in a ledger, written in neat Ottoman script. Disposed. The nuns of St. Catherine vanished from history. 18 women who had walked through hell, crossed the sea in chains, and carved prayers into stone in the dark, gone. But their chapel remained. A French diplomat in 1712 wrote of a rumor among the older palace servants, that on certain nights, if you stood in the lower halls, the air would grow cold, and you could hear women singing in Latin. He dismissed it as the foolish superstition of uneducated servants. The walls, however, do not lie. In 2011, when archaeologists examined the chapel more closely, they found something else. Traces of wax, not from Ottoman candles, but from an older source mixed with herbs, the kind of candles nuns made in their convents. This meant they kept their vigil for longer than anyone thought possible. Months, maybe years, carving crosses, whispering prayers, refusing to disappear. Sister Magdalena's bird was the last mark on the wall. Beside it, scratched so faintly it was almost invisible, were two words in Greek. We endure. But the truth is, they did more than endure. They left behind something no empire could erase. A room full of crosses, prayer carved in stone. Proof that faith could survive where walls and chains could not. The Ottoman Empire lasted until 1922, 6 centuries of conquest and power. But in the end, it was those scratches on the wall that endured. Not the Sultan's decrees, not Hassan Pasha's ledgers, not the silk they draped over Sister Eleni. Just 4 Latin words, carved by women the world forgot. Lux in tenebris lucet. The light shines in the darkness. So why does this story matter? It is not about religion, nor is it solely about the Ottomans. It is about what happens when power tries to erase people, and what happens when those people refuse to be erased. Think of it. An empire with armies, cannons, and limitless resources, pitted against women with nothing but fingernails and faith. And the women won, not in the way empires measure victory. They reclaimed no land, converted no captors, saw no freedom. But they left a mark. History is written by the victors, but memory is written by the survivors. And sometimes, survival looks like a cross carved in the dark where no one was ever meant to see it. The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard once wrote, "Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards." These women lived forward into darkness. They walked for days knowing they might not survive, crossed the sea in chains knowing what awaited, descended into tunnels knowing they might never see the sun again. But they carved their prayers anyway, trusting that someone, someday, would look backward and find them. You just did. In 2011, as the archaeologists stood in that hidden chapel, staring at those crosses, one of them asked a question that still haunts me. How long did they keep the vigil? The wax traces suggest years. The depth of the carvings suggests desperate, repeated effort, which means these women gathered, night after night, year after year, in absolute darkness, and refused to stop believing. Even as sisters disappeared, even as the scratches on the wall ceased to multiply, even when hope should have died, they kept carving. That is not just faith. It is defiance in its purest form. The Ottoman Empire is gone now, dissolved into history. The sultans are dust, its armies a memory. The palace stands as a museum, its halls trod by tourists unaware of what lies beneath their feet. But those crosses remain, and that Latin phrase, barely visible after 5 centuries, still speaks. Lux in tenebris lucet. It is from the Gospel of John, a verse about a light that cannot be extinguished, a truth that survives even when all else is taken. Sister Magdalena carved those words knowing she would never leave that palace, knowing her name would be forgotten, knowing the world would move on. She carved them anyway, because she understood something empires never do. You can conquer land, rewrite history, erase names from ledgers, and bury bodies in unmarked graves. But you cannot kill what people carry inside, and you cannot silence what they carve into stone. You have just witnessed one of history's darkest truths. If stories like this remind you how fragile memory is, how easily voices can be erased, then subscribe to Crimson Historians and help us keep the past alive. Because some voices deserve to be heard, even if they were silenced centuries ago. Especially then, the nuns of St. Catherine were meant to disappear. That was the plan. Erase them, break them, turn them into ghosts, converts, or footnotes. But they did not disappear. They are here in those crosses, in that Latin phrase in the chapel discovered after 500 years. And now they are here with you, because you listened, because you remembered, because you refused to let their silence be the final word. Lux in tenebris lucet. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it.